Back to Air Cooled Technology Radio with Jake Raby. Please join us in welcoming this month's special guest, George A. Hussey IV, a.k.a. Dr. 914, founder of Automobile Atlanta, to the show.
Since George is so renowned for his tech advice, I wanted to replicate what a caller could experience when trying to get a hold of George. So I called him up at Auto Atlanta, and this is kind of how it went. Dr. 914 at Auto Atlanta.
Hi, I'm George Hussey, and welcome to my business, Automobile Atlanta, which since 1978 has provided the best in Porsche parts and service. If you know your party's extension, you may dial it at any time. If you'd like to speak with a parts professional, please dial 5.
We're going to dial 16 for George.
Please hold while I transfer you to
George Hussey. Order desk.
Hello, George.
Is that you, Jay?
That's me.
Oh, hi. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Fine.
Well, you know, you're live here on the show. Well, actually not live. You're being recorded, but kind of caught you off guard. That's good.
I was calling for a giant parts order.
Well, you know, you just never know.
I want you to restore 914 to concourse perfection and totally turn around everything you've been talking about, and then we'll take it to the concourse competition. And to see that nice, big, giant trophy and to see that perfect 914, maybe you'll get a new lease on life.
You know, that it does that to a lot of people. I certainly believe that. So, well, first off, I want to welcome you to the show. It's an absolute honor to have you on here. And, you know, the first thing I have to say is this is the first time we've actually done a interview via the telephone with this new arrangement that I've got set up. So there's a little bit of research and development going on as we speak. But, you know, that's what I live for. And certainly, you know, everything's working out good here on this end. And if we have any technical difficulties, we'll deal with them as we have to.
Well, I am very happy you're spreading the gospel of the Type 4. Tremendous. I like you on the airwaves. Fabulous. That's what we like to hear.
Thanks a lot, George. That means a lot coming from yourself, for sure. So, you know, getting on into this interview here, you know, the reason why I wanted to have you on is because, you know, you're hardcore. You're a hard charger. You believe in these cars like I do, and, you know, you've stuck with it through all these years when you certainly could have went to another venue that probably would have paid better. And you haven't done that. So, you know, that means a whole heck of a lot to a guy like me. And that's why I wanted to get you on here so, you know, people get to hear your story and get to know you like they've gotten to know me.
Oh, that's nice. 30 years this year we're celebrating. 30 years. And it seemed like it was just yesterday when I was a little punk starting my used car lot down on 41 Highway. 30 years.
Yeah, that's a long time. Sure, certainly is. So, you know, first off, I want to ask you, you know, what's your air-cooled history? You know, how did you get started with these air-cooled Porsches?
My parents, in 1960, got for their 10th wedding anniversary from my grandmother a Volkswagen Beetle. And that was the day when the biggest behemoths were on the road. We all remember the 59 Cadillac convertible with the largest tail fins ever. Well, we had a 60 Buick LeSabre, black one. Two-door, towed our family around in. And when that little car showed up for the first time in my life, I mean, I was only 8 years old, I saw a car that was my size. And I marveled at how simplistic this car was and how perfectly built it was. And I absolutely fell in love with that car from the very first moment I saw it.
You know, I think a lot of children are that way. I know I was. You know, I mean, still today, you know, I've got more. There's more going on with me and Volkswagens than there are myself and Porsches a lot of times. I mean, I certainly own more of them than I do Porsches, but, you know, it was the same thing. And still today, when you go to a show, you always get the finger pointing and Mom, look at there's a bug or it's a beetle or punch buggy or whatever. So I think that's still today. I mean, it's certainly the world's most recognized car.
Yes, and back then, of course, it was part of Americana. It was virtually the only foreign import around, and everybody had one as a second car. And I sometimes look at the old movies, and we don't realize how things have transgressed to where back then there was a Volkswagen Beetle in every movie scene, and now you never see any of them on the road anymore. But that's how we all lived back then. Even when gas was 28 cents a gallon, those little Volkswagen Beetles kept chugging along, and we all so loved them. I had a couple of Mexican Beetles that I had somebody drive across the border at Laredo several years ago as a finally finished production. And it was like back in 1960, and I was marveling at how beautifully they were made. And I was driving them down the Interstate 75 and nicely having the wind blown all over the interstate, and just felt like it was back then, just a kinder, gentler era, as some people say.
Absolutely. So, getting into Volkswagens, I mean, at that age and at least recognizing what it is, what was your first 914 experience, and what can you remember about that?
My first 914 experience was, and I have to digress a little bit, the Volkswagen we had was great. We really loved it, and I became a follower of Porsche when my dad's prep school chum showed up, Jim Bain, one day with his beautiful 1959 green 356 convertible. And I thought, wow, the Volkswagen sports car, the car I always loved, now in this form. And, of course, it said Porsche on it. And from then on, I started to take a wild interest in Porsche until the guy across the street, Warren Budd, had this beautiful 912 that he just bought, and being the slob he was, never kept it nice. But my dad had taught me the fine art of washing and waxing, so I would go over to Warren's house after washing some of our big Buicks and station wagons and waxing them, and the joy of washing and waxing and cleaning this little 912 he had was just thrilled me. And, of course, he was very, very happy, and he once let me drive it, and that's the first time I ever drove a air-cooled car with the engine behind the seats, and just absolutely fell in love. That was it. And envied the kid in high school who had a 912 4-speed that his parents let him drive all the time. And, of course, being the oldest of 5 children, my dad working for the company, we didn't have ever a penny for anything extra. We had to ration even the orange juice. So never was I able to ever own a car like that. And became such an avid dreamer about Porsche, not being able to ever have one, thinking that they were the most beautiful car in the world, and collecting all of the brochures for the 911 and the 912s. One day I saw in Road and Track magazine this thing that Porsche was going to come out with. And my first reaction, what have they done? Where's the headlight? There's this oval thing where the headlight's supposed to be. And, of course, this car they were showing had these Volkswagen, what we call in the industry, dog pan hubcaps on it. And I was shocked that Porsche was actually thinking about marketing, I have to tell you, the ugliest car I had seen to date. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. And, of course, that was the New York Auto Show car that was the stripped-down model with the bumpers that matched the paint color and the dog pan hubcaps and no sail vinyl and no headlights except the ones that popped up, and where Porsche headlights should be, the turn signals. So that was my first introduction to the 914.
All right. Well, yeah, I mean,
and I'm not going to repeat that, and I hope this is not going out over the air. You told me that this was a private interview, and it was just between the two of us. Don't let anybody know about the way I thought about the first 914 I ever saw.
Don't worry, George. I'll never tell anybody that you thought it was the ugliest car you'd seen. So,
thank you very much.
And I also
between the two of us.
And yeah, absolutely. I won't tell anybody that that's the same way I felt the first time I saw one as well. So,
wow.
So, of all the more prestigious Porsches of the era, why did you choose to be a specialist with a 914? I mean, why not a 911, or, why something that is kind of like the, let's call it the bastard child? I've had people tell me there were bastard Porsches, bastard Volkswagens for a long time. Why did you choose this thing, George?
Because everybody thought that of the car, and there were 116,000 of them out there, and somebody had to be the head of the 914s. They had to find some guy that they could call on the phone and say, yes, I love that car, I have all the parts for that car, and I can give you all the tech advice in the world. And the way that came about is because I met a guy after college. I in college bought my fraternity brother's cast-off, an old MGB GT that I had to learn the hard way to fix after my dad saw it that summer, and like Pontius Pilate washed his hands and said, George, you never should have bought this rattle trap. Learn how to fix it. And I bought a set of Craftsman tools, and I learned the hard way. So by the end of college, I was repairing everybody else's sports car to run over the mountain to Sweetbriar and down the road to Hollands, and was making some pretty good money for a college boy. So I got out of college, and I was always looking for MG parts. My dream was to fix up this rattle-trap rusted MG, which now ran like a top but still had the rust, and met a guy that was advertising MGB engine and transmission with overdrive, 600 miles for $300. And of course, I instantly started to dream, as all young men did, and thought, wow, I could be driving this engine and transmission with overdrive right away. And I called him up, and his wife answered and said, we have sold that engine and transmission. The man is here buying it, and it happened to be Tom Campbell, the guy from whom I had purchased all my MG parts over the years. And I said, well, how can you sell it so cheaply? And she said, because my husband rebuilds cars. And I said, really? Yeah. May I come over and see? He said, sure. So I went over there. It was on Lenox Road. It was around the corner from one of the most prestigious areas in Buckhead now that one could imagine. And up in the woods, I saw at least 18 914s in various stages of discontent. Smashed fronts, smashed rears, front halves, rear halves, body shells being painted, and my eyes were like silver dollars. And I saw this guy in his driveway reconstructing 914s and reselling them back then. He had a rebuilder's license. He worked for the Atlanta Area Technical School. He was the chief instructor for body work there. And I was just amazed that he could do this in his yard. And I said, Phil, do you think I could work for you for a while and learn how to do this? And he said, sure. So I went there every day after my little job at the carpet place that I had after college, and I worked with him, and I saw the 914 from the absolute inside out and saw what a superior car it was to any MG that could ever be made, ever was made.
Of course.
And that I was driving.
Yeah. Wow. So when was that, George? How many years ago was that? What year was it?
That was back in 1974.
Okay.
I was a young guy, just had graduated that June, and I started to work with Phil that August, and worked with him for a while, and he encouraged me to get a job with an insurance company so he could funnel more salvage to him or give him the first try at it, and indeed that's what I did. And got a little job. It was paying maybe $10,000 a year, and he finished a car for me. It was a 914, and I went to the bank, and I got a bank loan on that car, and I got in that 914. That was the first one I ever drove, and I was just beside myself at how fabulously that drove. It was a Phoenix Red 74 with a tan interior, and it had 2,600 miles on it.
Wow.
But of course I had a bank loan on it, so I couldn't afford to keep it, and I instantly sold it, and I made, maybe $1,800 back then. And of course to me, working for $10,000 a year, $1,800 just like that was all the money in the world. And I saw how easy that was. I was never a very good salesman like my brother was, but it was easy to sell a 914 that was immaculate and low miles for under the retail value, as wildly popular as they were back then. And that was the beginning.
Wow, that's a really compelling story there. I mean, the thing that's kind of funny about that is at that period of that year, I was almost born.
Almost.
Almost. I had October of that year. So yeah, that's pretty crazy. That's a long time for sure to be working with one vehicle. So of course, kind of moving along. How did you earn the title of Dr. 914? I suppose that took a while to kind of get to that level, and I suppose you already were started with Auto Atlanta and doing that whole sort of thing. As long as I can remember, I got a hold of one of your catalogs and a lot of your stuff when I was probably 8 or 10 years old. I got it in a pile of junk that I picked up from a guy that was living in the middle of nowhere that ended up with a bunch of stuff that came from some Porsche place, blah, 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 down the road. But I saw it, and that's the first time I saw Dr. 914. So, I mean, that was probably 86 or 87, something like that. When did you get the title? And of course, you opened in 1978, so...
Well, it's amazing how those catalogs just sort of linger around, and even a pile of one man's rubbish from the remnants of his 57 Chevrolet project, there's a nice little 914 catalog there that somebody else grabs and appreciates. And that's one of the great things about these 914 catalogs. They stay around because that car is so wildly popular. Even the oldest catalogs have all the correct part numbers in them and all the technical drawings and all the stuff, although, of course, the prices have radically changed.
Yeah, and they're great reference materials. I mean, still today, I mean, there's times when, when I've looked at catalogs, not just yours, but a lot of catalogs to get, prices for stuff. And somebody was telling me the other day, it's like, you can take one of these catalogs and you can almost tell the price of what your used parts may be worth because it's based on what the new stuff's worth today. So.
Yes, yes. The Dr. 914 thing came along from a cartoon that one of our catalog makers, Mike, was drawing that had the 914 on its back with the doctor's stethoscope to its floor pan, listening to it and say, call the doctor for tech advice.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of made everybody think that maybe I was the doctor of the tech advice for the 914. But what it really came from probably is, and it's a very, very humorous thing. Anybody that would take Dr. 914 seriously, that's why we made it as Dr. 914. I don't want you to ever take it seriously because that's the last thing I want to be. Here in Marietta, we have a chiropractic, did I say that right? College that has the highest default on student loans of all because all of these guys, and when I started business, the head of Life Chiropractic was right across the street, and he used to come in all the time to see what I was doing at my 914 business. But anyway, all these guys wanted to come down, and they wanted to be doctors. Doctor, I'm going to pay you $10,000 a year to have a doctor in front of my name. That's very, very important. So all these so-called doctor wannabes were going into school, and then we saw Dr. Ferry Porsche, who was never really a doctor. He just got an honorary degree to be Dr. Porsche. The thought was that, well, I'm not going to ever, nor do I ever want to be Dr. Hussey, but to have the Dr. 914 is something very, very humorous. The word just started to spread, and before you knew it, everybody was calling me Dr. 914. And again, that's quite humorously. The few that call them are very, very serious. Is this the doctor? It makes me laugh. But it's a fun title, and I love it. And Porsche doesn't want me to use it. Figure that one. They actually sent a letter not to use Dr. 914 in any printed material.
Well, I think that we've all gotten those letters, and to me, it just makes me know I was effective. So if you if you got somebody, I got one that said that my crest, which is actually my family coat of arms, was confusingly similar to that of the Porsche crest. Well, no crap. I mean, it's a coat of arms. My family's German.
Yes.
Of course, it's confusingly similar. I think so. Yeah, this nice, really cool, massive logo that I made a hybrid out of wasn't able to ever be used, and luckily they sent it to me right before I was getting ready to have about 1,000 T-shirts made, and I was able to kind of say, hold on, I don't think I want to do this. So
yeah, better not fight them, that's for sure. Just change it. Somebody said that Max Hoffman designed the Porsche crest on a napkin in New York. That's what we hear, and then they decided that was going to be their family crest. So, I mean, who knows? That was an interesting story, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need a crest to put on your car.
Yeah, well, maybe we can get somebody on the show from Porsche to answer that question.
Yeah, right. They change personnel like underwear. The place is only 6 miles from here, and we usually talk with those guys there, and you call them one day, and they've got a nice business card, and then the next day, well, he doesn't work here anymore. His such and such is there. So, I mean, what is that all about? We are the diehards, you and I, Jake, and we have been in it forever. We will be in it forever. We love these cars till the day we die, and that's where the company should be asking the questions, us, the diehards. I always say the guy that does it on the weekends in the Porsche Club is so what, but the guy who does it for the living is the what.
That's right. I mean, it's one of those things where as we come up with new stuff and as we keep these cars on the road, that certainly is, that's what's keeping that's what's selling new Porsches today. You know, these old cars are what's selling the new stuff. And that's, I had a very long conversation with the person at Porsche that day when I called up to gripe about this stupid letter that I got. And I said, look, do you even think that anything that I'm doing is going to bother Porsche? All we're doing is keeping these old cars on the road that people actually notice. When a 912 or a 914 passes somebody, that sparks their curiosity. And then next thing you know, now they have a Boxster. You see what I mean? And it's just like with the new Beetle. The same thing happened with Volkswagen when the new Beetle came out. They were putting people out of business and doing all sorts of craziness. And it's just because they created a car that was generic. It was just like anything else. It kind of looked like the old one, but the old one is what sold it. And that's, today, with all these new advertisements you see that have old Volkswagens in them, if I see one of those things, I turn it off. I don't even want to look at it,
I always have said, if Porsche was smart, they would print these T-shirts with the most beautifully colored Porsche crest. And I have to say this in a nice way now because I know we're in an interview. Give them out free to these beautifully well-endowed women to wear around all the time. That would be the best advertising they could ever have, but yet they don't want or do anything with a printed crest on the front.
Oh, absolutely. All right, so we're kind of getting, into Auto Atlanta, into Dr. 914, the whole idea there. So, do you remember the first day you were open? Anything stick out in your mind about that? I mean, like with me, my business started when I was a teenager. I sold my first engine to a customer, which I didn't know was a customer at the time, when I was 13, and my dad went down with me, and we started a business checking account when I was like 12 years old. So, of course, I certainly don't remember the first day I was in business, so to speak. It was something my dad was doing to teach me. I'm certainly sure he never would have dreamed it would have blossomed into what it is today, and certainly neither did I. But, do you remember anything about that, George?
I was shoveling mud out of the parking lot with some 914s, and I had a BMW 2002, and I had even an MG up on the grassy median, advertised for sale with the windows soaked up with prices. In fact, I think there's a picture of me doing that. And, of course, back then we had bell-bottoms and we had longer hair. Not that my hair was ever that long, but compared to today, it was long.
Well, the thing I'll say
there I
is,
was, shoveling away.
one thing that's a note to all the listeners is if you're listening to this on your iPod and it's an iPod Touch or it actually has any graphics on it, or if you're looking at it on iTunes, you'll see as we're talking here, I'm putting up pertinent pictures out of George's Auto Atlanta archive. So there's some really interesting pictures in there, and I'll be posting these on the website as well for the radio show in case people don't have any access to something they can actually view it with while they're listening to the show. You'll be able to see these pictures that George and his crew were able to dig up for us. So, George, I mean, tell us about the early days. How did you get this momentum to become 914 World Headquarters?
Well, Jake, I started out, I was a little sheepish. I was the oldest of 5 children and really was sort of sheltered, to say the least, and sort of scared to go out and do things on my own. So after I retired from Chrysler Corporation, that's another little fun story, I was working with Phil again. We were over on the Bankhead Highway, and we were rebuilding cars over there. By this time, he had a shop, and we were rebuilding all kinds of cars, but we'd start to specialize in one car after the other. Like, for example, we did Mercury Capris for a while. And I was actually selling them out of that shop over there, and it was in not a very nice area of town, to say the least, right across from a big salvage yard. And I was pretty successful in selling these cars. These people would come down this old road and see this giant insurance company auction salvage yard with 101 plus destroyed cars that some people had even died in, and then they would turn into this building and they would see all kinds of pieces of cars being reconstructed, and then they'd see a nice shiny one in the middle, and they know exactly where it came from, but the price was right, and it was really immaculate because I took good pains to make sure it was that way, and I was selling these cars. Well, soon enough, I had a some money saved, and Phil said, well, and by that time, I had never really lived on my own, so I was sort of depending upon Phil. I worked for him for free. I had my little bit of money saved, and I would help him fix these cars, and I would buy the car from him, and then I would sell it, and I would pocket the profit on top of what he sold it to me for. But I was actually afraid to go out on my own because I didn't have any steady income. I had just depended upon these cars. So I was actually living on a 50-foot houseboat next to his shop off the Bankhead Highway that was propped up on 55-gallon drums. And I had run water into it and run electricity. And I was living on the Bankhead Highway in a houseboat. And any of you who know what the Bankhead Highway is, I think it's called James Hollowell Parkway or something like that. I cannot remember. Know how bad that section is. So here I was living in the houseboat, and Phil said, this is not the kind of life for you, George. You need to go and get an apartment. And I don't know, Phil. Just go do it. So I went over here to Acres Mill, which all of you probably have heard about Riverbend. It was in that movie about the pilot, anyway, I can't remember, who kept changing identities. But Riverbend was the place to live back then. And I went up to the Palisades, and I got an apartment there where I was selling cars out of my apartment. This was back in 78, I guess, between 78 and 79. I actually opened my business, I guess, in 79, December of 79, I guess, now that I'm thinking about it. But anyway, so here I was, and I moved into that apartment, and I was really inspiring these guys to get these cars ready because I was selling them, one and then another and another. And, of course, in the Riverbend area, now I had this venue that was fabulous for this beautiful Datsun Z sports car or any of the others there, heavily waxed, heavily washed, clean, one after the other. I had two phones running into my apartment, and I was selling cars, meeting a lot of women, which was fabulous, and living absolutely the life of the king. But I decided that, this isn't really a legitimate business. Here I am working out of my apartment. I have a business license and all of that kind of thing. And I thought, well, you should really, I said, Phil, let's open a used car lot because this is going pretty well. Nah, George, I'm just content doing this. I said, come on, Phil. And Phil, I guess, is about 10 years older than I, so, 34, 44, 54, maybe, 15 years older than I at the time. Real gung-ho, high-energy guy. I really admired him. And, in fact, that's the guy I dedicated my Tech Tip 700 to. And he didn't want to do it. So the Snap-on guy kept coming by, and he wanted to do something else, and his name was Ron. So not being able to do it myself, I could have, but I was sort of scared to go out on my own. But with a partner, I thought that would be great. So we moved, found a place on 41 Highway, opened the doors, put the cars out, started to sell them, incorporated the name Automobile Atlanta, 500 shares each of stock. I put my money up. Ron didn't because he didn't quite have it together yet, and started to sell sports cars, and it was doing fairly well. Well, lo and behold, a couple months later, Ron still didn't have any money and started to give me a hard time, and he really didn't know anything about the automobile business, and actually he was older than I, started to get a little bit violent with me, and that was it. I couldn't deal with that, so I had to have him escorted off the property. And he said, but this is my place. And I said, sorry, Ron. And the cop said, sorry, Ron, and escorted him on. That's the last time I had a partner. And from then on, I was on my own, and I'd finally matured enough and got a little street sense, at least a little bit, to handle it myself. So I hired a body man, and he was doing all right, doing repairs. And then I hired a guy to do some mechanical repairs. But as then and as now, I always have trusted everybody implicitly, and before I know it, one of these body men was really a crook, and he stole from me, and the other guy I lent some money to, and he went bankrupt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I was all in the school of hard knocks, and then Jimmy Carter took over, and the economy went absolutely to hell, and interest rates went crazy. Nobody could finance a car. Mm-hmm. Nobody. Before I know it, I was in the toilet, and I was about to go under, and I was down to my last $8,000, and I had assets. I had all of these cars now, and I had all of these 914s out back that I had accumulated because I had been fixing a couple, and the car sales were impossible. The part sales for the 914s were great. Everybody had a smile. Everybody was fixing up their car. Nobody could buy a house. Nobody could buy a car. So I thought, I've got to do something here. And I had a small building, so I went home, and I hate to say this, and I had to, anyway, I got Performance Products Catalog, and I got Automotion's. I don't think Automotion was in business then, maybe. I got the Han catalog, and I got a couple others, and I cut them all up, and I got all the pictures, and I pasted them in this new catalog, and then I used the old Tweaks catalog, and I cut out some drawings of 914 parts, and I pasted it all together in a logical order, and I put some tech tips in there because I'd known the cars pretty well now because I'd taken them all apart and put them all back together. And I went up to the local printing place and had them print a newsprint. And then I called up Road and Track, and I said, would you put an ad in for me? 914 Specialist, catalog, $3. And, oh, my God, they came out of the woodwork.
Wow.
I was absolutely shocked at the response. And I went in what did I do next? I put that catalog out, and then I moved to the current location here because it had a lot of storage room. And when I moved to this location, it didn't look as good as the other one, so two guys instantly quit on me. But I could just see all the storage potential of this old, circa 1947 porcelain manufacturing building for 914 part storage.
Mm-hmm.
And I hired a couple of young guys, in fact, one whose parents had bought a 914 from them. He was very well-spoken, put that phone number out, moved here, and I went from I was down to my last $8,000. I had a few cars, needless to say, but I was down to my last $8,000 in 81, to buying a brand new 911 Cabriolet in 1984. That's how things turned around. I was just amazed. Everybody was so sick of these people saying, "Oh, that's just a Volkswagen Porsche. We hate those cars. We hate those cars." That here I was with a kind word and having the parts for them and giving them a little tech advice, and that's what it took. And I was totally turned around, and from then I never looked back. Obviously, there have been some ups and downs, like when the 914s waned a while after they were they got older, 100,000 miles, people sold them, they went to the second owner, didn't drive them all the time, they weren't insured. The 924-44 came out, 83, Ronald Reagan was in office, that absolutely boomed, and those really went by the wayside. So we've had some ups and downs, but business has been steady, that's for sure, and I was enabled by the parts sales to begin to make more and more 914 parts that I could think of in our efforts here to provide everything that somebody would need. For example, the very, very first one I did was the door latch, the plastic door latch cam, because we were selling the $50 door latch back then. Of course, it's $160 now. Nobody could really afford to buy a $50 brand new door latch when just a little plastic piece was bad. So I took the door latch apart. I took the plastic piece over to a molder. I had an $8,000 tool made. I modified the plastic piece so it was easily installed. I had the piece made. They cost me 30 cents each after I paid for the tooling. I had several thousand done. I was selling them by the hundreds to Automotion, Performance Products, and retail, $12 guaranteed for life, and I've never had a warranty claim.
Wow.
But that was the very, very first one I did, and then I've done a lot of different parts from then.
Yeah, and I think that, it's the same thing with what we're doing with the engine stuff is, to really be able to have total control over something and make it the way it needs to be made, the only way to do that is to oversee it and manufacture it either yourself or you to go to that manufacturer and say, this is what I've got to have, this is the way it has to be, these are the tolerances for it, and when they bring it back to you and it doesn't work, you have to say, no, I do not want this, you're going to take all these back, you're going to throw them in the trash, and you're going to make them right. And that's really what it takes. And a lot of times you can't be a nice guy about that, as we've, especially with all the stuff that's being made overseas now, it's made it a challenge. It really has really made things a big challenge. That's why I got away from the Type 1 engine, was because of the Chinese parts. You could not build an engine correctly without having to worry about the thing. I mean, you have to take every part out of every box, totally rebuild the damn thing, and then put it back together.
How about the 97, 98 Boxer engines? We have to worry about every one of those poor guys that's driving one of those cars, and I can't wait, our Savior, to where you come up with that engine to save all of those cars, because with over 200,000 Boxsters out there, that's the next one that the third generation, fourth generation owners are going to desperately need parts, and there's no such thing as, as a good used 98, 97 Boxster engine.
That's
So
right.
depending upon you, Jake, you're going to be the savior. Dr. Boxster. Dr. Boxster.
Dr. 986, I suppose. Well, the thing I have to say about that, George, is I just got back. Myself and my wife went on a 2,300-mile scavenger hunt to pick up a whole truckload of Boxster engines from a fellow that's been doing a lot of X51 conversions and all that sort of thing. And that's, we're going to be talking about the Boxster stuff here at the end of this show. I've got a little section set up that I want to talk about it, but, we're really going to be delving into that thing. Pete Stout and his crew are coming down from Excellence the beginning of July to do a big feature on what we're doing. And we got some serious momentum with this now. So we'll talk about that at the end of the show.
That's great.
So, George, I want to take a little bit of a break here and go to a bit of a word from one of our sponsors. So we'll come right back with more from Air-Cooled Technology.
Looking for that rare Porsche part no one has been able to find for you? Worried that your parts supplier will laugh at you for your $1.25 order? Not at Automobile Atlanta. Your fellow Porsche enthusiast since 1978, we try harder to get you absolutely everything you need for your Porsche restoration, no matter how small or obscure. Backed by the best printed catalogs in the business, a restoration shop full of your friends' Porsches, and the National Porsche Factory Warehouse just around the corner here in Atlanta, our friendly salesmen, technical advisors are always at the other end of the phone for detailed tech advice or parts ordering at any time of the day. If you've never tried us or are new to the hobby, call us. You'll like what you hear at Automobile Atlanta. 1-800-794-4924. That's 1-800-794-4924. Call Automobile Atlanta today. And now, back to Air-Cooled Technology Radio with Jake Raby.
Okay, thanks for that word there from Auto Atlanta. After we did that advertisement there for George, I have to admit that there was kind of a mutual mistake made. George, you want to kind of go over that and give people the correct phone number?
Oh, great. I cannot believe I did that. When we came out with our new, we had never had an 800 number. That's back when 800 numbers were expensive. So finally, when we had our new mass mailing of our 924-44 catalog, all the 800 numbers, a lot of them were taken, so I came up with the 800 number of P9, Porsche 924-944. And I can never remember the number, so I always get it backwards. And so the number's not right. And I guess P is 7, so it would be 7924944, and that's not in the right sequence, but whatever, that's the number. Or you can call it 770-427-2844. That's the one I know. But these days, long distance is so cheap, who cares whether it's an 800 number or a regular number, that's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I had people used to, when I first got into business, people griped all the time. They're like, you don't even have an 800 number. And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
you're lucky you're able to call and talk to me. I got stuff to do, man. Leave
Exactly.
me alone.
I figured that separates the men from the boys. If they don't want to pay for the phone call, the hell with that. In fact, at one time, I was sort of a stickler. I'm giving away all this free tech advice all the time, and that cost me a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And they're calling on our 800 number asking for tech advice. So that used to bug the hell out of me until, of course, it didn't cost anything anymore. But just the fact I'm paying to talk to them, that...
Well, absolutely. And I mean, the thing is, I mean, a lot of times, and I you and I can see eyeball to eyeball on this thing at the same level, but people take for granted what it takes to learn this knowledge. Either one of us could have certainly paid our way through Harvard with the amount of crap we've had to put up with and blood, sweat, and tears and working all night long to learn this stuff. This is not something that's easy, and anybody that tries to restore their car, they will understand that in the end. So, I mean, it's something, certainly I know I don't ask for all that stuff in the world because I'm, all the recognition and all that sort of thing. A lot of times I get more than I even want with this stuff. But, it's something that people really take for granted today with the internet, especially because they think they can jump on any forum and have anybody in the world answer a question. And forums have been a great thing, but at the same time, they've also been a really big source for misinformation. And that's one reason why I spend so much of my time sitting there saying, hold on a minute, how many times has this guy done this? Where is his data? Where is his information? How many times has he busted his knuckles doing this? And why is he giving information to somebody about something when he has never even done the job himself? There's a lot of parrots out there, a lot of guys that will read something, totally misconstrue it in their mind, and then go out and tell somebody else. So, I certainly think that's been a great thing with the internet and a bad thing at the same time, because people think that information, that everything is right. It's kind of like going in the middle of in the middle of the country somewhere and asking somebody for directions. You don't know if they're going to tell you the right way to go or not, and it may not be the easiest way. They may have a totally different way to get there than what you need to use to get to that destination. So,
And as they always say, the written word speaks louder than the spoken.
absolutely, and that's why we've been doing a lot more with reference materials with this engine. There is no Tech Tip 700 for the Type 4 or any of those sort of things. I mean, there's certainly a lot of tech tips in your reference materials that you've put together, but there's never been anything for the Type 4 engine other than the Bentley manual and the Haynes manual, which even have inaccuracies in them. And certainly today are not even accurate anymore because the engines are 30-some-odd years old, and none of those specifications and clearances can even be attained with buying off-the-shelf parts. So, all right, well, I want to kind of get the show in another direction here. We've got a lot of really dedicated members over on the 914 world, and even some from my forums over on Air-Cooled Technology online community that have given some really good questions for the doctor here. So, the first one came from 914 World, and it's on pre-purchase inspections. And this member wants to know, when I get my 914, what do I fix first and why?
I would say it depends on the car. And my quote, and I don't know whether somebody else has come up with this first, but I attribute it to myself: if you have no body, you have no car. And my whole program is to make all the body parts first, to re-weld the chassis, and then if you have the body, then you go from there. Then you can have the car, the engine, the transmission, the interior, the suspension, and everything. And unfortunately, we can't buy a new body. We had in the past been able to buy a new body from Porsche and take a hard wreck, say. Back then they weren't as badly rusted, if needless to say, but we could buy a brand new body and we could put all of the parts from the old crash on it, including the serial numbers, and have it inspected and have a brand new car virtually. But of course, Porsche has sold the last body. There's still a 6-cylinder body available in Germany. I think the last they wanted 15,000 euros for it. But we just have to take for granted the fact that we're never going to have any more 914 bodies for the rest of history, and we have to save every one we can. So if you buy a 914, the first thing you need to do is save your body. And that means, of course, looking down in the notorious battery area, because it was perfect for balance and accessibility and electrical power, but it was a bad location because of the grill on top of it and the heat next to it for the battery not giving up the ghost on us. And that means washing the acid down the frame member, which just happened to be downhill right up underneath the battery, and breaking the car in half on the right side. We've seen many, and then breaking the suspension console apart also.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
the body has to be addressed first.
Yeah, then that's, it's just like building a house. I mean, you got to have a foundation. When you start building a house, you certainly don't do the roof first. I mean, how the hell are you going to do that? So I totally agree. I mean, that has always been the Achilles heel of the 914, is the way that the car is made and the way these things are set up. You certainly have areas that are rust prone, and that area underneath the battery box, a lot of people, I mean, they just don't look there. I mean, that's a nook and cranny up under there. The last 914 I had, there was pine needles and leaves and all kinds of crap up in that area, and, underneath it was rust, and you would never know that was there. So certainly I totally concur with that, and just it's a common sense thing. You got to have the body. Everything else can be redone, and certainly you guys have all those parts, so that's no big deal. So, and that kind of brings us into the next question. It's how bad is the rust problem, and what can I do to prevent it?
Well, the cars, because of that great Type 4 engine and the way they were built, have still been driving long after the bodies were just shot and rusted in half. Usually the typical sports car, like the old British sports cars, even the Japanese sports cars for a while, the power plant would really give up, and they would be parked and really not be that rusted. So what happened with the 914, it was just so damn reliable that the people let the rust creep up on them, and this car kept driving and driving and driving without incident, and before you know it, where the Fiats and the MGs and the Z cars would all be in the junkyard, the 914 was sagging in half and still driving, and the people had no idea what was going on until maybe they couldn't open the door. And then finally, they look at this car, and the car is, it's not history, but as far as trying to fix it for any kind of a reasonable expense, it's history. I'll never forget the time I was called by, we're called all the time. We do a lot of rust repair here. I was called, this was probably 10 years ago now. A guy called and said, I'd like to bring my car down for some rust repair and paint job. And I thought, sure, okay, just typical. So anyway, this car came down here, and the top was off of it, and it parked out front, and I didn't know it was he, but these people were signaling us, and we thought, my, curb service here at Automobile Atlanta. Well, we're gentlemen. I'm going to go open the door for at least the lady. So we walked out there, and there were these two very, very, very heavy people in this 914. And they were signaling me, and I said, hi, how you doing? And said, well, I'm Jack, or whatever his name was. We're here I called you about the rust repair. Oh, and I didn't even say rust repair. He just said paint and body work. I said, okay. And I saw this car. It looked pretty ratty on the outside. And he said, well, would you please open the door for me? And I thought, well, sure, I'll open the door for you. And I looked, and I saw that the door was absolutely jammed against the quarter panel. And I said, I think we got a little rust problem here. I got the mechanic to come out with a floor jack and jack the car up to open it so that we could open the door and let these two people out. So we let them out, and they were very nice, and I went over the car very carefully with them, and I said, I hate to tell you, but this car, and don't quote me on this, it was really, really bad. It had been botched and sectioned and scabbed and rebuilt, and the paint was horrible, and besides the chassis rust, the whole thing on the exterior was just a total disaster. We had better cars up the street where the dearly departed rest. And I said, I hate to tell you, but this car is just not worth saving. We can get another car, and we can fix another car for you, and you can have it. Maybe you can put your engine in this other car. That would be the best thing to do. Well, we drove all the way down here to fix our car. Got very, very mad, and I said, I wouldn't drive this car another 5 miles because the suspension could fall out of it. Well, they went out there, they got in their car, and they drove off back to Ohio. And we had the biggest laugh that day over the fact that the 914 was that damn reliable in that sad a condition.
Yeah,
and trying to get
amazing.
them some good advice. Yes, trying to give them some good advice, and they poo-pooed us, so to speak. So
I've
that'll
had
give you an
that
idea.
occur too. I've certainly had the same sort of thing happen. People just they think that everything is rebuildable, and it is. I mean, they got $1 million to fix the car, then absolutely you can fix it, but it's never going to be the way it should be when it's that far beyond repair.
No.
So,
and again, like anything, if you have a car that is that far gone, there is no reason that you shouldn't be able to fix that with another car to make it better. So, for example, these 356 guys now, they're taking a cowl that they would find in a pasture, getting a registration on it, sending it over to Italy. They've got aerospace industry labor that'll work for 25 cents an hour, anything for a job. They're reconstructing the whole car from just a cowl and making a 356 that's beautiful and sending it back to Germany. And more power to them to save a piece of Porsche history. That's why all these cars I have up the street, and I probably have, 100, over 100. Years ago, I used to strip them and cut the bodies up. These days, I do not cut any body at all. I take the parts off of them, and I just park them there, because someday somebody's going to grab that 914, and they're going to want to restore it. And the older they get, everything around them goes to hell, and these cars up in the junkyard look better and better and better as the years go by.
absolutely.
And We know that with the popularity of 914s and guys like you making sure that somebody can get an engine with a little power to it, people are going to restore 914s. And the simplest cars are always the ones that are restored first. And the 914, thank God, is a simple car. And that's
Absolutely.
one of the other reasons that I adopted that 914, because I'm not real bright. So a simple car, a simple guy, it works.
Absolutely. So, that kind of brings us to a question that I've got, on my list for, basically toward the end of the show. But since you brought this up, I think it may be a really good time to address it. It's been said that the 914 is the next 356. Do you share that feeling?
Absolutely. No doubt about it. 911 is a little too sophisticated. The later years got a little more luxurious. But the 914, like the 356, no bones car, just the raw sports car feeling, performance. And I call the 914 the greenhouse car. When you get into 914, it's so low and so wide and has so much glass area, you really feel like you're in a greenhouse. You can see 360 degrees around you. There's no blind spot. The car is relatively quiet. You're sitting so far from the passenger. There's so much leg room, and there's so much distance between you and the exterior of the door because those nice rocker sections, that you really feel one with the road and the surroundings. And I remember that series of ads like the Beach Porsche and the Shush Porsche, et cetera, et cetera. They were really some really great ads, and that was a kinder, friendlier era, at least in the late 60s when the 914 was incepted.
Sure, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, I certainly think that over the past few years, and let's just say, 10 years ago, the caliber of person, and I'm not talking about how much money they have or anything else, I'm talking about drive and what they want to do with their vehicle. The caliber of the 914 owner was that of, I'm cheap, I've got this because it's a Porsche, even though it's a Volkswagen, you know what I mean? That is who owned the cars then. Today, I see more of the second, third, fourth generation guys that are taking these cars and they are building it into a driving machine because that's what it is, and the expense is not the reason why they own the car. I mean, the 914 is the first Porsche I ever owned. I mean, of course, it was a piece of junk, but it was a Porsche, and I was like, oh my God, I got a Porsche. Back then it was a Porsche. And I had a hell of a lot worse accent than I've got now, if you can even believe that.
We have that great shirt that says Porsche is a two-syllable word, and Porsche approves it, and it's very, very reasonably priced. If anybody wants one, just call me, and it's $14. Porsche is a two-syllable word. How's that for a little blurb?
Absolutely.
Or we have one on eBay. You can get it on eBay also. Porsche is a two-syllable word. Then everybody will know. Of course, here in the South, you know how they talk.
Absolutely. Well, see, that's kind of funny about you, George, because you have the New England accent, but you've lived here for so long that you just sound confused. It's just...
Yes, I am. Every day I'm confused, especially in my old age, Jake. I get more confused.
Well, it's like when I was a Marine stationed out in California, it was one of those kind of deals where if you wanted to get a date with a girl in California, you just didn't talk. Because as soon as you open your mouth, if you're from North Georgia and the mountains the way I am, oh, my goodness, you're just the biggest redneck in the world. So I capitalized on it. I said, hey, they filmed Deliverance pretty much in my backyard. And then people laughed about it.
Yeah, you've got other attributes, that's for sure.
That's right. So anyway, getting back to some of these questions, what books have you written about the 914, and which of these has been the most popular, George?
Jake, I really don't have the time to write some 914 books or things like the video that I would really admire you for handling and being able to do, because I often thought about doing some technical videos because we're here doing it every day, but just the setup and the filming and the double takes, we've got so much business going on here, it's just hard to stop and do it. What I wrote is something that I was able to do on every holiday. It was almost like I was going to say Holiday Inn, where they only had the inn open on these holidays. Well, I only had the mind open on these holidays because I was so intensively working at every other time and being constantly interrupted. Most of the time, I'm on the phone every day giving tech advice. I give so much tech advice every day that I can't even move sideways. But I thought, well, I'm giving the same tech advice over and over and over again, like fourth fuse from the right is loose, that's why your generator light comes on every time you hit the brake pedal. What I thought is if I could put all of this together in a book and mass sell it, it would eliminate some of the burden of these people calling me over and over and over again. And then if somebody called about this, I could tell right away they didn't have the Tech Tip 700, sell it to them, and then they wouldn't have to ask me as many questions. As we all know, mechanics are hard-pressed to ever give away their so-called secrets. I'm not that way. I'm the first to call for advice. That's way too closed-minded. Well, I'm not going to tell you that. That took me a long time to learn. No, I lend tech advice freely. So what I did is I wrote a book, and I call it the Tech Tip 700, that bears all about the 914, and I tried to be absolutely as forthright as I could, giving away every single secret I ever learned. Now I'm not a mechanic. I know my way around a ratchet wrench. As an aside, you'd be surprised about the guys that call me and said, how do I rebuild my engine? And I said, you know what a ratchet wrench is? And they say, no. I said, no, well, you'll never learn to rebuild your engine. So I know a little bit about that, but I'm not one to be able to. I mean, if you gave me a Type 4 engine and said tear it down and rebuild it, I don't actually think that I could do that.
Really?
You know, I could get it done out back, but I actually don't think I could do that. I mean, I could read the book, of course, but don't depend on my engine. I'll just give it a Raby, and then I'll have a good engine. But I am more of a guy that knows how the car works, and I listen to what people say over the years, and I've seen the car from the inside out, and I've touched absolutely everything, so I could effectively, therefore, write a book that gave away all the quirks and all the secrets about the car in its old age. The Haynes manual takes a brand new car apart, puts it back together. They never knew that the fourth fuse over from the left was going to not make connection, or that the suspension console was going to fall out of the car when the tire was leaning out on the right side at the bottom, or that the springs would sag. They never knew anything like that, so they couldn't write a book. I, after 30 years, well, back then it could have been 20 years experience, had seen it all, could write it all down and put it in order. I put it in order just like the Porsche factory parts book, 1 to 10, 1 being engine, 10 being owner's manuals, 9 being the electrical. I mean, it's about the same lineup as a Volkswagen.
Mm-hmm.
So I organized it that way, and I wrote that here every single holiday. I was here on New Year's Day. I was here on Christmas Day. I was here on Thanksgiving. I was here on Easter. I was here on the 4th of July. I dedicated myself to taking every holiday until I had that book written. And it worked, and I put it together, and I've sold over 10,000 of them.
Wow. Yeah,
And
I have
did
to
the
agree
same
with
the
that.
924-44.
You know, I've done the same thing. It's just like, you know, on holidays, I'm so in mode. I mean, you can't relax. And for years, I lived 50 yards from my shop. So, you know, it was always on. If I went into the house and I turned on the TV, I know that there's a year's worth of work, if not more than that, 50 yards from me, and why the hell am I watching this stupid made-up thing on TV when I can be applying myself? And then I would do the same thing. You know, I sit down and write some tech articles and stuff like that, and, you know, actually when I hurt my back about 2 years ago, and I got more done tech article-wise that way because I was stuck sitting at home in my basement for literally about a month. I got more stuff written on our forums and more stuff shared in that month than I ever had before, because we're too busy living it and doing it to be able to share it a lot of times. So I certainly agree with that. So,
good point. Yes, and that's what it took, and that's the only way I could get it. So I started to write some other things like how to buy a 914, and I wrote and wrote and wrote, and then I didn't have any more time, so I call it the rough copy. But it's a very valuable guide. And then I wrote the how to convert a 914-6. I wanted people to know what they were getting themselves into, so to speak, because everybody wants to convert to a 6. I don't say convert to a 6. I say leave it as a 4. A 6-cylinder is just way too rigorous. But I wanted them to know what they were getting themselves into and the expense, and that's how I wrote that. It was not necessarily a blow-by-blow like reconfigure. Well, I did have to reconfigure the electrical board, but it was not how to install the oil tank, but what you had to do to get it in there. And I wrote that as well. So I have several different things out there. And then I wrote the 924-44 Tech Tips, which Road and Track was so kind to mention in one of their review articles.
Well,
But that's
that's
about
great.
it. And I, with all I've got going on, I can't see myself writing anymore, and depend upon you, Jake, to do all those technical articles now.
Well, just I've tended to lean more toward technology, like all the gadgets and gizmos I've got to do this radio show and to do my video stuff because today it's just very difficult to share information via text because people don't want to read. They won't read. They won't sit down anymore. They
Good
wait
point.
until they have a problem before they look at a reference material.
Wow.
And the reason I know that because I'm the world's worst. If I get something that has to be put together, I take the damn thing out of the box. I don't even know where the instructions went because I'm mechanically inclined. I build engines for a living, and I can beat this thing. I can overcome it. No, I usually end up having to look at the damn instructions at least one time or have to get my wife to help me because she can read instructions and do things like that better than I can. I'm much better just starting from scratch. You give me a pile of junk and I'll make it run. But, that's certainly people today are a lot different than they have been in the past. So, all right, George, well, we got a couple more questions here. The first one is, my question is for George. It's how many of these cars are going over to other countries each year, and if so, which ones and why?
Well, I wouldn't have any idea of how many, but I can tell you that the 914 was really made for America, and 75% of the whole 914 production came here, and 75% of that went to California, and that means that they were starved for those cars. They never built a right-hand drive, so they never went to England. The few that were imported to England went to Crayford Conversions, and it was a butch job. The few that went to Australia, that was a butch job also. So the distribution of 914s was to the U.S. for all intents and purposes. So they really didn't grow up with the car. It was titled VW Porsche over there, and now if they want a 914, they have to come to the United States. The few that were over there were abused. They totally rusted away. They were nothing. And we don't have a great following over there for the 914.
Mm-hmm.
So that means not that many go over here. They want to buy the 911s. They want to buy the 912s. They want desperately to buy the 356s. But really, not that many 914s. They do want 914 six-cylinders over there. But from that being said, I have recently, with the exchange rate and the fact that all of these air-cooled Porsches have climbed so dramatically in value, seen quite an increased business to Europe over the past 2 years. We are probably selling maybe 2 914s a month to Europe, and if I could find more and get them here so I can examine them before I sell them, I could sell probably today maybe 10 a month to Europe out of our facility.
Wow. Yeah, I share
hear-
that. I mean, I certainly see the same thing with the engines, for sure. We sell a lot of stuff overseas, but it's more for the conversion guys. You can tell by
Right.
the parts they're ordering. It's not a
Right.
guy that's building a 914 for a 914. He's putting it into a Beetle. He's putting it into a 356, all those sorts of things. And, I mean, every now and then I'll get somebody that has a 914 race car, and then they want to buy an engine or they want to buy some parts. But it's very few and far between, and it seems like the concentration of them are in the UK. It seems like if there's a 914 in Europe, that's where it's at.
Right. Well, we have been blessed, and you'd be surprised. We've been blessed by a woman who works here. She speaks French, she speaks German, she speaks Dutch, she speaks Flemish. Dutch and Flemish are about the same. Obviously English, and she has opened the French market and the German market for us to where we are really selling, percentage-wise, a lot more parts to France and to Germany than we are to England or Australia or any of the other countries. It's really amazing, and there's some real diehards like the 914 Club of France who are really enthusiastic about these cars, and we are creating a market over there. We really are for 914. It was like all of a sudden, for the first time, the 914 is being introduced to Europe.
Well,
like
I
it's a
was,
new car.
when back in 2006, I went to the Classic Le Mans, and that's something you need to do sometime, George. It's just incredible, the cars that are there,
Wow.
not just Porsches, but everything. And I was pretty lucky. I was able to go there on my honeymoon, camped out, a couple miles from the track and just kind of lived it for a couple of days. But, they had Porsches parked by serial number, by VIN number, in the Porsche corral. And I'll put some pictures up on the show when I'm editing that portion of it to show people how many 914s were in one place at one time. And certainly nowhere near as many as there was 911s and 356s, but I found it interesting. They were parked by VIN number, and there was enough organization to get those cars there and to get them parked in that method of covered in a line. It was just covered in a line. I mean, cars were perfectly lined up, and they were all just really good drivers or perfect cars. It was really amazing.
I often think that if I had, not that I would have, if I had started back then doing muscle cars or Corvettes or something like that, I probably really could have been pretty successful, because I sort of had the formula for mail order parts, and I see these gatherings of Corvettes, and I am so jealous for the fact that they are dealing with an American car here in America, to where they could go call the manufacturer and GM that made the original part back for some 67 and say, please make it again. I don't speak the language. I can't call the guys that made the parts in Germany and say, make it again. My hands are tied there, and it would be so great to be in that position, or even get factory licensing to make a replica part like GM and Ford gives to these people.
Absolutely.
We could really help the 914, but
I've
alas,
shared that.
to us, it's a foreign car, and to them, it's a European car, and so they can afford to have a corral with serial numbers lined up.
Absolutely, and I share the same thing with you. I mean, there's been times where I'm like, this is really difficult. The things we're doing, having to totally redesign another engine and make it into something that never was from the factory, it's difficult. It's not easy. I mean, and it's certainly, a lot of people took it for granted for a long time until they realized the level we had gotten to with it. And still some people take it that way today, until they drive one, of course. But I certainly share that feeling with you as well, George. So
anybody as dedicated as you, Jake, to take an engine that really doesn't have a Type 4 engine, doesn't have that great a following, and to make it into something superior and take all that time to do it. I mean, you got to pin a medal on your chest. You really do. I mean, there's got to be passion there, because it's certainly not something that's going to make you $1 million, that's for sure. A guy like you could probably go to GM and be one of the designers, well, maybe not GM these days, Nissan or somebody like that, and you could probably help invent the solution to the gasoline-powered car and be multi-millionaire at least, Jake. But instead, the guy's dedicated to the Type 4. I mean, you got to give the guy a hand. Wow.
Well, I appreciate that, George. That means a whole hell of a lot coming from someone of your caliber that's as dedicated to what to the car as you are. And I've had people tell me that before. They're like, people that don't know anything about this car, they happen upon my website or whatever, or something like this radio broadcast, and they're blown away. I'm just totally blown away. I've had people buy engines from me that didn't even have cars to put them into. They basically went out and bought a car either while I was building them an engine where they could get the perfect car that I told them was going to house that engine the best, or they bought a car afterward. I've had that happen before as well, and it's kind of a cool thing, but that's what keeps me going with it, and that's what I really appreciate about it. And I like to do things different, kind of the way you did with the 914. It was kind of a bastard. Well, the 914 engine was a bastard for many, many, many years, and then it just took somebody really trying to figure the thing out and not working on anything else to really come up with it, and that's what we've been able to do. And I'm glad that I've gotten the recognition from somebody that's also equally dedicated to these air-cooled cars. I really appreciate that, George. So some more questions here, and we're going to have to keep moving along because we're kind of taking a little more time than normal. I actually may end up breaking this down into two parts of this interview, George. We may have a kind of a two-part setup with you here. Instead of just doing a one-part show, we may break this down. That's how good this is. So I appreciate you staying on the line with me as long as you have and sharing that valuable time. Why do you think the 76 914-4 will be a future high dollar value over a non-original 6? I know the 76 is the last year 914 with low production figures and all have 2-liter engines, but they have ugly bumpers. In my opinion, the 2-liter 73 914-4 will always be the top value in 914 4-cylinder cars. I kind of grabbed that off there just because. Do you think that there's any significance about the 76 the other years didn't have because it's the last? I share his feelings, thinking that there's portions of the car that are very ugly. But what do you think about that, George?
Well, I'll first say, to me, a 76 is a new car.
Absolutely, yeah.
A new car. I keep thinking, wow, 76, that's a new car. Because it's the last year of the 914 and the newest that anybody can buy. That aside, the question talked about the low number of those cars made, 4,100. The fact that they were all made in 75, December was the last one, December 75, that being done because if they made one car in January of 76, it would have had to conform to a whole new set of crash and pollution standards, so they couldn't make them in January 76. They made a bad decision in phasing out the 914, thinking everything was going to be water-cooled front engine. And the reason they thought that is because they could more control the emissions on a water-cooled car, and with the engine in the front, they could more control the crash standards. And with, and I'm telling you your business now, the water-cooled car, of course, had not anywhere near the tight tolerances that the air-cooled car had, so it was a lot cheaper to build. So the new flagship was going to be the 928, the German Corvette, and its little cousin, baby brother, was going to be the 924, and that was going to be the whole new way Porsche was going to go. Well, the 928 came out of the assembly line building and fell flat on its face, and so did the 924. They just weren't the car that Porsche was known for, and that is air-cooled engine behind the seats. And Porsche quickly stirred back up that 911 production, and if they hadn't done that, they would have been bankrupt. I know they would have been bankrupt, and there were stories written about Porsche was really, really hurting, dedicating millions of dollars to this 928 that no Porsche-phile liked. And that was back then before the wide appeal of Porsche mystique and everybody able to afford one. That was way back when Porsche was going to set the trend. You're going to like it or not like it, American. Well, we didn't like it, and finally this company that everybody in America loved was in a little bit of disfavor. So, of course, everybody knows that the 914 was too expensive because Volkswagen made it. Porsche finally took over the production and more closely supervised it in 75 and 76. And in my opinion, those were better cars than the earlier models. If you take one apart and cut it up, you'll see that the car actually has more reinforcement in it. And the bumpers that were put on that car were actually very, very well designed based on what they were going to do to the 916. The 916, of course, it's got fiberglass bumpers on them. In fact, I'm looking through the glass and looking down the roof of the 916. You hear the glass there? How many people can say they're staring at a 916 all day, which I do? And they would have had impact bumpers on the 916 that were pretty curvaceous looking. So the 76 914, therefore, was well designed to be more aerodynamic, a little tiny bit heavier, handles on the interstate when you're on the American interstates better than the early cars. It was the very, very last year of the car, and again, the low production numbers. So a better built car, lower production numbers. Sure, the engine wasn't everything we wanted it to be because it was down on power because of the reduced compression and all the emissions and the damned air pump and all of that. But the car was really the last of the great 914s. And every time I look at a 76, a tear comes to my eye because I know that's the last 914 that was ever made. And I only drive a 76, only. And, of course, all the 76s were 2 liters. So if you want a collectible, buy the very, very last year. It was the best year. All the refinements were made. It will be by far the most valuable. Buy one, keep it in original form with fuel injection on it, and you got money in the bank until they discontinue gasoline, and then you hurry and sell it just before they discontinue the rest of the gasoline.
Well,
gasoline is going to be $10 a gallon in 5 years. That's my prediction.
Oh, probably before that. We're going on the track we're going on now for sure. So
$10 a gallon. Thank God, a good fuel-injected 914 on the open road, not Not the last year they made them, but the good 1.7s, maybe a 72 model will get 35 miles on regular gas, cheapest stuff money can buy. Well, it's not cheap anymore.
Absolutely. And, you know, the 76 model year, the thing that I find interesting is a majority of my customers with 914s that are coming to me for a Rabyized massive engine, you'd be surprised how many of those guys have a 76. I mean, it's a tremendous amount compared to the others. It seems like the 73s and 76s are the ones that I get the most calls for. You know, and that's a good thing, I feel, because nothing they have to do to put this engine into their car is compromising the originality of the vehicle. Everything can be, you know, everything's irreversible. I mean, nothing is irreversible. Sorry about that. Everything can be undone that they're going to do in just maybe a weekend or two. So instead of putting the Subaru motor in it or doing whatever, they're at least keeping the original 914-4 foundation there.
Yes, and I say the same thing to people. If you want to have some fun and your car is not so perfect and original, have fun with it. Put the Raby engine in there. Keep your original fuel injection. Bolt on the wheels, bolt on the tires, bolt on the shocks, but keep the essence of what the car is and don't butch it and modify it, and keep it Porsche, have fun with it, and still have the original essence. We don't mind the bolt-ons, just like you said. We really don't.
Yeah,
and
I mean, all that
days,
stuff can be redone very easily. So,
on the other hand, if somebody wants to come here and buy one of the dearly departed up the street and bring it back and put it back on the street, if they just choose to put a V8 in it or an I don't know what they put in, the Mazda Subaru engines or anything like that, I'll pat them on the back and I'll hug them and I'll say, at least you saved some of the essence of a 914.
absolutely, absolutely. I share the same thing. I mean, if you're going to take, and if anybody's listened to this show that has a 76 car or a really nice, clean car, and you want to make it into some supercar, don't do it. Just leave that car the way it is. Go to George's pile of junk, so to speak, and grab something and then bring it back. You're going to super modify it anyway, so, you know, why not start with something that's already pretty rough? And I do the same thing with Volkswagens. You know, I see oval window Beetles being compromised. I'm by no means a purist, but if you're going to do something, drag a car out of the junkyard. Don't take an original car and do that. And it's kind of a crazy thing because you're talking to the guy that took the very last Volkswagen Beetle convertible ever shipped into this country, documented, with 27 miles on it, took the original engine out of it, and put in one of my engines because a French chef named Joel Antunes bought that car.
Yeah, he was here. I guess last year or something.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. I mean, he had a restaurant in Atlanta. He still has it. Now he's in New York, and he's since sold the car. But he wanted that car his way. He put a glove leather interior in it, put one of my engines in it, which is actually far superseded now, but at the time was absolute top-notch leading-edge stuff. But you know something, George? If he hadn't sold the original engine on eBay, I could have taken that car and put that original engine back into it in one weekend and had that original car that actually ended up with only having about 1,130 miles on it when he sold it. I could have put that car back together the way it was and nobody ever would have known it. You know, but he ended up selling the car for a reduced price because it lost its heritage when that engine went away, and when it had, you know, when it, even though it got a pedigree from me, that pedigree is nowhere near what it had from Volkswagen being the last car. It even had the paper plate on it, George, the dealer license plate. I was the first person to drive the car after it came off blocks. It is absolutely incredible.
You know, if a car came to us like that, a 914, and the guy wanted to spend, I don't know, $20,000 doing this and that, we wouldn't do it. We'd say, no, we're not going to do that. We are not going to touch that original car. You can pay us all the money in the world. Like the guys that come here and want to color change. No way. I will not color change.
And right there is when the computer crashed. Luckily, I caught it in time and was able to save the recording, but at that point, George and I were terminated. So we're going to pick up with this conversation where it left off in its intensity with George in a special edition of the show coming up in the middle of June. So you'll be able to hear that here at Air Cool Technology Radio in middle June with George to finish up this interview. And George is such an interesting guy. And you know, the funny thing about this is I never met the man. We're 80 miles from each other. I've been doing this all my life, been crossing paths with him, and then never met him. So it's when two people like George and myself share a lot of the same feelings and ideas and intensity about things, putting both of us in the same room on this show can be interesting. So I want to go to a word from a couple of our sponsors, and then we're going to wrap the show up with what we're going to cover in next month's show and the special edition show as well.
The Weber, Solex, and DeLorto carburetor specialists at Air-Cooled Engineering can take those old, dirty, poor-performing carburetors and make them better than new. We've been experts in the best of Volkswagen performance products and services for over 26 years. So next time you have carburetor problems or need hard-to-find parts for your carburetors, call ACE at 801-943-1234 or see us online at www.aircooledengineering.com. Sponsored by Special Edition Inc., home of the Beck Speedster and 550 Spider. The world's leader in vintage Porsche race car recreations, engineered for today's discerning drivers. Relive the past while cruising into the future in your very own custom-built Beck Speedster or 550 Spider. Call 866-396-BECK or visit us at beckspeedster.com for full details. Beck, the only name in vintage Porsche replicas. And now, back to Air-Cooled Technology Radio with Jake Raby.
All right, I want to close this week's show with a little bit of information about the Peanut Special Land Speed Car and with Air-Cooled Innovations Racing news. We missed a race with Air-Cooled Innovations Racing because we had a little bit of a upset with some parts and this and that, and we just weren't ready to go to the track. Kind of ironically, the Peanut Special had a similar issue. However, it's because he was changing his suspension around. So he was able to successfully miss the meet on May 19th over at Maxton, North Carolina, where we were going to put that 2-liter roller-cammed 14-to-1 land speed race engine to the test. So in May, it was pretty much a total, it stunk for racing with air-cooled technology. However, we got a lot of other stuff done, and racing isn't everything. So we're going to be going to a lot of new races, both with the land speed car, and we've got a couple coming up with the Air-Cooled Innovations Road Race 914 Porsche as well. So I want to get to the close of the show, and let's get right into the tech tip.
And now for the Tech Tip of the Month, brought to you by LN Engineering.
Well, with warm weather upon us in most of the country, it's time that everybody that's running carburetors thinks about their jetting. Of course, hotter air, and if you're in, like on the East Coast where we are, high humidity, are going to play a key role in the effectiveness of your carburetors. If you made a jet change over the winter to possibly make the engine run a little bit better with that colder, more dense, and even drier air, then think about seriously, doing a check on your air-fuel ratios. Check your enrichment. If you can afford a LM1 or a similar device, purchase one, and check your air-fuel ratios at cruise and at wide-open throttle. That can save you a considerable amount of gas. So, of course, with gas at $4 a gallon, this month's tech tip is check your jetting.
Unleash the full potential of your Type 4 air-cooled engine. Gain the ultimate performance. Superior sound. Best looks. And greatest longevity for your Porsche 914, 912, or conversion vehicle. Tangerine Evo exhaust systems deliver a dramatic improvement in power, whether applied to a stock or modified engine. Race-proven technology for your street machine. TangerineRacing.com. Now, back by popular demand, it's Jake's Rants and Raves.
Well, by far, one of the most popular and most controversial parts of the old Fourth Dimension show was my rants and raves. They're back. Because certain times I just need to gripe about something. I think we all need to do that. And this one comes to you courtesy of the Samba. And what really sparked it was this fellow went out of his way to admit that he had no first-hand experience with a Type 4 engine at all, that he had never worked with one, that he had no idea what put them into conversion applications, but then he says that he has a friend that had too much torque. And because of this, he broke things in his car and he broke things in his gearbox because he had too much torque. There's no such thing as too much torque. We try our best to make as much torque as we can over the broadest RPM range possible. And at no time is there ever too much torque unless you do not do the proper things to outfit the car to handle the torque, which is more than likely what his friend did, if his friend even existed, because he might have just been a figment of this guy's imagination that popped into his brain while he was smoking something that he was obviously smoking when he was making his post over on the Samba. So, you know, the only thing that gripes me about this is because he gets in our way. People go out of their way, they have no experience, they make up things, they make up lies, they do whatever just to keep the Type 4 engine down. They think that's what it's doing. They don't realize that it's pumping this thing up because people are reading about it and it's getting in their mind. So while there's a certain part of me that's ranting about this, there's also a certain part of me that's raving about it because I know that some good came out of that post. So, you know, if you're over on the Samba, do a search for it. I can't remember what it was now, but the guy was trying to put an engine into a bus, and he was asking about big Type 1s and Type 4s, and then this guy just kind of comes in out of the blue and says, oh, you don't want a Type 4, it's a piece of junk, and his boat anchor, and my buddy broke his tranny, and he broke his frame horns, and that thing makes too much damn torque, it's a piece of junk, the heads fall off of them, it's a boat anchor, whatever, get over it, dude. This is 2008, the Type 4's here. If you don't like it, you're going to get passed by one.
You've been listening to Air-Cooled Technology. Our sponsors today have been the Type 4 Store, Air-Cooled Technology, LN Engineering, Tangerine Racing Products, Hoffman Automotive Machine, Special Edition, and Air-Cooled Engineering. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time from Air-Cooled Heaven and Air-Cooled Technology Radio.